The hallway rang out with a harsh crash of metal against metal. Heads snapped around instantly, but just as fast, most students pretended they hadn't seen a thing. Trouble near the lockers wasn't rare, but this sound felt different, heavier, sharper, like something finally breaking. That slam wasn't just a locker door. It was the last shove in a storm that had been building for weeks. Amara staggered backward, her face pressing into the icy steel, the shock knocking the breath from her chest. Her books slid from her arms and hit the floor, pages spreading everywhere, messy and helpless just like her patience. She blinked once, then again, swallowing hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of them. Crying only made things worse. Crying made them stronger, and the three girls blocking her path, Shelby, Brianna, and Katoredi, had more power than they deserved. Since the first week of school, they'd ruled this hallway like it belonged to them. Oops, Shelby laughed, twisting a strand of her flawless blonde hair around her finger. Did I hit your tiny little head? Amara forced herself upright, her jaw tight, her fingers balling into fists without permission. She stopped herself, breathing slowly, counting in her head. She'd made a promise to herself and to her mum that she wouldn't fight anymore. The last time ended in detention. The time before that, suspension, and she couldn't afford another mistake. But the sharp ache in her jaw wasn't what hurt the most. It was the laughter, the low snickers echoing from every direction. Kids watching but not stepping in. Kids who didn't know her story and didn't care to. Amara had transferred to Westfield High just 3 months ago, dragged along by a life that never stayed still. Her father was in the military, which meant suitcases, goodbyes, and starting over again and again. New schools always promised fresh starts, but somehow they also painted targets on her back. She wasn't small, but she wasn't intimidating either. What no one here knew was that her father had trained her in boxing since she was barely able to stand steady. Not to hurt people. Never that. It was about control, discipline, confidence, knowing she could protect herself if the moment ever came. But in this place, none of that mattered. Here, people measured your worth by your clothes, your phone, and where you landed in an unspoken social ladder. And Amara didn't belong on any rung. That's how it started, the slow escalation. At first, it was small enough to brush off. A shoulder slammed into her in the hallway. A quiet comment about her thrift store jacket. A folded note shoved into her locker that read, "Go back where you came from." She pretended it didn't hurt. She told herself they'd get bored eventually. That if she stayed quiet long enough, it would all just fade away. But Shelby was never the kind of person who got bored of being cruel. And today's slam felt different. This wasn't teasing. This wasn't a joke for laughs. It was meant to hurt. As Shelby leaned closer, her smile sharp, her breath hot and mocking, Amara felt something deep inside her finally break loose. Something she'd been holding back for months. The turning point. "Don't touch me again," Amara said quietly, her voice steady but dangerous. Shelby burst out laughing. "Or what? You gonna cry?" She sneered. "Oh wait, 2 already look like you." She never finished the sentence. Amara's right hook landed square on Shelby's jaw with a clean, cracking sound that made half the hallway stop in mid-step. Brianna rushed forward in shock, but Amara's left fist was already moving, snapping up and catching her under the chin. Kate tried to grab her from behind, hands clawing at her shoulders, but Amara twisted sharply, driving her elbow into Kate's ribs. It wasn't wild. It wasn't sloppy. Every movement was calm, controlled, exact, just like her father had taught her. When a teacher finally came running down the hallway, all three girls were bent over, clutching their faces, gasping for air. The hallway was completely silent now, except for the quiet sound of Amara kneeling to gather her scattered books. The consequences came fast. Amara sat in the principal's office with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart still pounding beneath her ribs. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on her chest. Fighting was never supposed to be her answer, but neither was staying quiet forever. The principal leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but thoughtful. "Amara, I've listened to both sides," he said calmly. "You understand there will be consequences for this." Amara lifted her eyes and nodded slowly. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady, even though everything inside her was still shaking. "But they should face consequences too," Amara said quietly, and for the first time, the room didn't feel stacked against her. To her surprise, two other student kids she barely recognized came forward later that day and backed up her story. They talked about the whispers, the shoves, the notes. Security footage didn't catch every moment, but it caught enough to show a pattern, enough to tell the truth. Shelby, Brianna, and Kate were handed 2 weeks of suspension. Amara got 3 days. It didn't feel fair, but it felt heard. When Amara returned to school, something had shifted. The air felt different. People didn't look at her with pity anymore. Some looked at her with respect, others with a little fear, and while popularity had never mattered to her, she noticed something far more important. The hallway felt safer. The bullies kept their distance now. And more than that, they kept their distance from everyone. Maybe they finally learned their lesson. Or maybe they realized they couldn't hurt people anymore without facing real consequences. One afternoon, as Amara zipped up her bag, a small voice stopped her. A freshman girl she'd never met stood nearby, clutching her own books. "Hey," the girl said softly. "Thanks for what you did. They used to mess with me too." Amara smiled, warm and gentle. "Just remember," she said, "you're stronger than you think. But strength isn't only about fists. It's about knowing when to stand up and when to walk away." She meant every word. Violence was never the answer every time, but that was non-negotiable.